Welcome. I'm so glad you're joining us today for the Back to You podcast. My name is Ann Baxter, and this season we're creating a space to share stories of hope. This is episode 2 of a series where my husband John and I are talking about our experience with COVID. If you missed episode 1, you'll want to make sure you go back and listen to that first before you dive into this episode. Let's get started. I knew that the Lord was in control and that He loved you and that He was going to care for you and care for me no matter the outcome.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think about that time because my thoughts at that point were, I'm going to go to the hospital for a day, 2 days maximum, because they might need a day to observe me after I get better. And, I wasn't even, it just tells you where my head was around this. Is like, it's complete denial that I'm as bad as I think I am. And to hear your experience is just such a, we're light years apart on that, but living through the same exact thing.
Yeah. And fortunately, when I took you back in, they let me sit in the waiting room with you. And I don't know if that's because they just were overwhelmed or if they just knew you couldn't sit there by yourself. But I could tell that they were concerned about you because they took you multiple times back to triage to monitor you. And the second time when they called you back into the emergency room, the nurse said, I'm sorry, you can't come back with him. And I had already known, that was the case. But, we said goodbye. And I remember transferring your arm to her arm and then just smiling at you, saying goodbye.
Yeah, I do remember that, and I was pretty wobbly at that time, so I needed help just to shuffle along. And I think about again what different experiences we had because they helped me shuffle down to this room, and you got in a car and drove home to a bunch of kids that at that time I didn't think it was even in their mind that I might not come back home. And certainly whenever you handed me off to that nurse, I didn't think I was walking through doors that I may never walk out of again. And it's hard for me to think through that now and experience the feelings, especially after hearing our kids talk about it, what that was like for them. And that's what you were driving home to.
Yeah, it was really hard. And, when I think back on it, I felt so scared and sad and strong all at the same time. And I know that was the Lord just carrying me in people's prayers. But I cried probably the whole way home, probably for the next day. And COVID is such a lonely sickness. Knowing that you love that isn't your immediate family can be close to you. So I know that you've said that before, babe, but for me, that drive home was really lonely. And I remember about halfway home, my thoughts shifted to the fact that I had kids at home that were going to need me. And man, that felt so heavy. And so I just remember praying and asking God to help me to lead them through this well, because I wanted them to feel His presence and to experience Him in a way that they hadn't before. And I knew that, how I was there for them would just make a big difference for how they handled what was going on. And having 5 kids is a lot, even just having John around. But I knew that it was no surprise to God that I would be walking through this alone. And so I just remember on the way home, just whispering up prayers to the Lord and just asking Him to give me wisdom as I spoke to them, and to help me to see them and to see their struggles, and that they would fill in the spaces where I couldn't be there for them. And so it was just really difficult to get home and just know, at this point, Ginny's home from practice, and just to know that they all needed me at the same time. And, we all gathered in, and they're adult size, but, at least 3 of the 5 of them are adult size. And I just didn't have the arm space for all of them. But we gathered in and we squeezed in as tight as we could. And I took turns just holding them as we all cried. We have one, she struggles a little bit with her emotions. And so I just remember offering up so many prayers in that space for them to be able to process through, what they were experiencing, that God would be close to them, that that he would comfort them and hold them. And as I'm holding, whoever I could, I just remember reaching my legs out and arms, trying to touch each one of them to make sure that they could feel my touch, even though, they didn't all fit on my lap. It was a hard time. We prayed a lot and cried a lot, and we just listened to, there was a song during that time, and it repeats a little bit annoyingly sometimes, but Turn This Thing Around. And we had that on repeat over and over again, just praying that the Lord would change the course of where it looked like John's COVID experience was going. And there was something that I felt like up until this point, I just hadn't really had to grapple with. And it was the fact that John could die and that it wasn't looking good for him. And if he did die, was I still going to trust the Lord? Was I going to believe that he was good and that he had a plan even in John's death? And I think it was at this point that I just said, you know what, God, I'm going to trust you no matter what. And I felt like it was at that point that the fear lifted off of me, and I could really feel secure in the fact that the Lord was in control of the situation. And so I think for me, looking back, there's been times where I've kind of felt like, is it really worth the prayers that I'm offering for someone? Isn't God just going to do what he's going to do, regardless of how many prayers I pray, or how many prayers the people around us pray? But I was reading in Isaiah 38 a couple weeks ago, and it's the story of Hezekiah, and he was sick, and the prophet told him that he was going to die. And the Bible says that he wept and prayed to the Lord, and the Lord heard his prayers, and he saw his tears. And then it says he added 15 years to his life. And so I think in knowing our prayers, they make a difference. And so over the course of the next 9 days, I just really begged the Lord on John's behalf. I think, but in the next breath, also just handed up to him the fact that I trusted him with the outcome no matter what. And so, John, you went into the hospital on Tuesday afternoon, and for me, Wednesday and Thursday were my worst days with COVID. And I just love to look and see where God was at work that I just couldn't really even see at the time. And I do this a lot in my life, but I just know that on Wednesday and Thursday, I was so sick. I could not have cared for you like you needed me to care for you on Tuesday. And so I just see God's hand in that, and how he orchestrated the details of that, and how he allowed me to care for you at your sickest point, and that he allowed me to rest on the days that I really needed to rest. Unfortunately, we found out about monoclonal antibody treatment on day 10. So you were too late to be treated with that. And a friend of ours, she sent us, it's called My Free Doctor, but it's basically some doctors that are trying to treat people for COVID. And it takes a couple of days to get in with them. And so fortunately, I had started the process. And when I came down with COVID, I was able to be treated by them really quickly. And they gave me ivermectin and doxycycline and hydroxychloroquine and also a bunch of supplements. And so I had 2 days where I felt kind of crummy, and then I started to recover after that. And so I was really fortunate that I was able to be treated by them. So, John, we drop you off, and are you able, at this point, I'm not able to follow you in. So are you able to share what was happening for you? What was it like for you in the ER?
Yeah, for me, it was, like I say, a lot of this is blurry, but there's things that you kind of like highlights that I remember. And I remember shuffling back to this room, and then another set of doors that, I don't know if they're like airlocks or what, but it opened up and closed. And so they get me into this room, and it's your typical emergency department room. It's small. It's, I think everything's painted the same color in there. And I remember them putting this yellow bracelet on my wrist before they did anything else, but this, like, not big, but yellow bracelet in big bold letters. It says fall risk, because they were worried about me falling over. So I wasn't allowed to move or do anything on my own. I had to have somebody there. And of course, they give you this gown you have to put on. And I could barely even get my shirt off to put the gown on. So I have to have help with that. And
I remember you telling me that at some point you turned the fall risk bracelet around.
Yeah, that was several days later, because I was,
Okay.
I didn't like looking at it, and it was just a reminder of where I was at. But at that time, I was still pretty out of it. And I remember my cognitive abilities had slowed down so much, I couldn't figure out the gown. Like I couldn't find like even the sleeve, so they'd come over and help slide that on me. And I think I had a pair of athletic shorts on that they just left on me. And then they like helped me kind of pivot into this bed, and there's multiple people in the room, because they know I had COVID because I'd been there a couple of days prior. They had seen my x-ray and all my vitals from a couple of days ago. And I think we're comparing them to what the triage nurses had handed them, which was drastically different. And so they're trying to do a bunch of stuff all at once, and it just seemed like a flurry of activity all around me. And there's some annoying things that I had, like they just broke out these clippers and like shaved everything off my chest and started hooking up all these sensors to me. And then they taped something to my finger that had a wire to it. And I found out that was the O2 sensor. And probably the biggest thing that I remember is laying there, and they're trying to run an IV, but I was so dehydrated. My body was so beat up. They tried 7 different times, each in a different place, running the whole needle into my arm, trying to land that IV in there, and they couldn't do it. And you have to understand, like, your body's in so much pain already from COVID. You're just laying there hurting, that your pain tolerance is very minimal. And so I just remember that hurt so bad. And then I look down at my arms, and I have like these 7 cotton balls taped to me all over the place. And I think finally they called in like the master, she rolls in and gets it on the first shot, and they got the IV going. And then they start hitting different medicines into me, and they had me on a really, I won't say it was really aggressive, but like that IV was really running because I think I was pretty dehydrated. And then they're doing chest x-rays, and the lab tech is coming in with more needles. And I remember the position they had me in. I was trying to ask them, which I could hardly talk at that point, if they could move the bed, because I was in a position that just made me cough. And at that point, I've been coughing so much and so hard that all of my core muscles, like muscles I didn't even know I had in my core, everything hurt, which is added to the pain and the misery of it. And I would fall asleep in between interactions. I really don't know how long I would sleep, probably just for minutes. I'm guessing because there's so many people coming in and out and all the stuff that they were doing. And I understood, like, they wanted to figure out what was going on so that they would know how to treat me. And I'm guessing that went on for an hour or two or four maybe. And it's interesting for me to compare and contrast my couple hours of just trying to breathe and have all these people trying to take care of me, and you're at home alone taking care of people while you have COVID. And the reality is we're only a couple miles apart. I mean, the hospital is just like a 4-minute drive from our house, but we were close, but we were really, really far apart.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I just brought to my memory is on my way home, I was talking earlier about how lonely it was. And I pulled up in our driveway, and we had a friend that was sitting in our driveway in his car, and he was praying for our family. And I just think about how good the Lord is to just, in your time when you feel like the lowest and the loneliest, and to have someone come and do that. There were just so many things during this journey that I felt like was just little love notes from the Lord, just a reminder, that he was near. But that night, I actually didn't hear from you until the next day. And shoo, that was a long night. The silence was excruciating, and the emergency room was overwhelmed. And so I had left, multiple messages that just weren't returned. And I understood, because I would prefer them to be taking care of you than talking to me on the phone. But it was just really hard for me, knowing that I had dropped you off in such bad physical and mental condition that you basically weren't advocating for yourself at all. And it just really took me a little bit of time to just relinquish, the control of being your advocate over to the Lord, just as if it wasn't him all along. But he did remind me that he would use me to advocate for you, but that it wasn't something that he needed me to do. And so once I made that shift mentally, I could just really see him advocate for you in so many ways over the next few days. We had a friend who was just an acquaintance at this point, who she fought for you to be on her floor in the hospital. And just 2 weeks prior to you being in the hospital, she was our daughter's counselor at camp. And I love the fact that I don't think that was a coincidence. I think that was orchestrated by the Lord. And she also suited up and prayed over you when you were in the emergency room. And for us, it was just really comforting to know that she had her eyes on you and that she had prayed over you. I know that was comforting for Dakota. And God would just remind me that he was working, even, if I couldn't see where he was at work. And so, the next day when I finally got a Polo from you, I was so excited, but you looked and sounded terrible. It only showed part of your face, and you could only say a couple words at a time. And then you would do like the Darth Vader breath in, and your eyes were closed as you sent the Polo. And I was like, oh man, it just seemed like you were in the Twilight Zone. Do you remember?
I do. I remember sending that Polo, and I actually watched those Polos. And when we say Polo, we're talking about Marco Polo. It's an app that we have on our phones. It's basically video messaging. And I watched those Polos, and really, really painful for me to watch those. And it takes me back to a place that I really don't want to go to mentally or emotionally. But those were those are Polos that I didn't know how long I had been there. My vision started to get really blurry, and so it's hard for me to see. And I could pick out the Marco Polo app on my phone, and then I knew I had you on my favorites list as number one, so I could know that one. But I remember I was laying there. I think I was laying in the bed, and I just had the phone resting on the bed in front of me, and was trying to talk to you. And but again, I lost track of what the timeline of events had been at that point. And, I didn't know if it was day or not night. There's no windows, and it was hard for me to even read time. I just remember them doing lots of tests on me, lots of tests, especially lab tests. And they were trying to figure out what was going on. They knew I had COVID. They knew my lungs were beat up and that I had a really high fever and I had a really high resting heart rate. And the ER doc, there's several docs that I interacted with while I was in the emergency department. And one of them rolled in. She let me know. She's like, yeah, you have COVID pneumonia. And we know that you were here on Saturday and you had your COVID pneumonia wasn't too bad. But then she let me know, she's like, but your labs are all over the place. And so there's a lot going on with your body. She said, typically labs are all over the place with COVID, but we're seeing some things in yours that are concerning. And so when you hear an ER doc say it's concerning, you get really concerned. And then she threw out another statement because she looked over at my monitoring system. She's like, but your O2 levels are good enough that we could probably send you home right now. And I think at that point I was in like the low to mid 90s, but I was really, every time I was awake, I was doing my breathing exercises, just trying to stay under control and keep that O2 level high. And I remember taking that slow, deep, Darth Vader breath in. I looked at that doctor and I said, you and I both know there's more to this story than my O2 level. And there's no way I could go back home right now.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Don't forget to like and share this episode. We'll be back in about a week with episode 3, where we'll share a little bit more of our story.